Hello. This is my first day without her as well. This is weird. Very, very weird. I always wear a sash as well. I love a sash. I don't need any excuse to wear a sash. I love it. But the reason I have to have the sash on was because last night I was having a look at the Hall's website here, and I found out that suffragettes used to meet here. And I was like, how phenomenal is that I get to stand on a stage where suffragettes were. So I'm just loving this. What I would say as well, before I forget, this Hall has a suffragette history, but also, if you've got some time, go up Victoria Street. There's a suffragette memorial up there, and there's the Caxton Hall as well. So there's so much suffrage stuff. Can you tell I'm a suffrage geek? I absolutely love it. But that's my passion, and that's what I'm actually focusing on this year, the programme of Past, Present and Future. Has anyone heard of the Suffrage Flag Relay? Some of you? Yay! I love the Suffrage Flag Relay. We have a flag that goes across the UK. I think it's in York at the minute. We all have a look at Suffrage Flag on Twitter for that. We've got blogs. We took part in processions as well, so I got to wear my sash again. We took part in Civil Service Live, and we've got a final event in December. I could talk about the history of women in the civil service, but I've got some very special women to tell you about it instead. So if we could just play the video, please, that'd be fab.
This is a video about women in the civil service, celebrating the past, present and future of our contribution to public life.
Women were first hired by the civil service in 1870. Employed as telegraphists in the post office, these women had to be middle class, had to be unmarried, and were strictly segregated from the men.
A married woman who is not a widow is not eligible for any appointment in the General Post Office. Any single women now established who marries will be required to resign.
Eventually, the Treasury created a class for women typists in 1894. However, women had to endure segregation and unequal pay, as the Royal Commission on the Civil Service report demonstrates.
Women should be fixed on a lower scale than those of men, and female clerks, where employed, should be accommodated separately from male clerks.
World War I was a turning point for women in the workforce. With men away fighting, women stepped up to support the war effort to keep the country running. In 1911, 33,000 women were working in the civil service. 10 years later, this had more than tripled.
The war revolutionised the industrial position of women. It found them serfs and left them free.
The government acknowledged women's contribution to the war effort by passing the historic Representation of the People Act in 1918.
So Vicky, this is it. This is the Representation of the People Act 1918 that allowed women to vote for the first time, right in front of us.
Yes, this is it. This is what all those women and men were campaigning for, although it is obviously partial reform. So ultimately, I think frustrating for many people who would have campaigned as part of the suffrage movement actually wouldn't have been rewarded with the vote ultimately.
Yes, so tell me, who was eligible under this act to vote?
So essentially the main qualification is that they're 30 years old, but there are also additional qualifications that go alongside that. So property qualifications, the need to be registered as a local government elector or be married to someone who was, and even a university clause as well. So it's quite complex, and actually it enfranchises millions of women, but is still relatively small reform in terms of equal rights.
Despite these important achievements, the general public was still resistant to women working in male-dominated fields, especially when men started returning to work after the war. This included women such as Isabel Paisy.
No decent man will allow his wife to work, and no decent woman will take the work away from single women and widows currently looking for work.
This negative attitude extended to the civil service, who banned all married women from applying for government jobs and required women to resign upon marriage. This was known as the Marriage Bar.
The 1919 Sex Disqualification Removal Act removed some of those barriers of the marriage bar for some professions, but it maintained until 1946 in the civil service. So essentially you had to be single or widowed to work in the civil service as a woman.
Right, so I wonder if many women chose between their career or their marriage. I don't know.
You get a sense that some women are really pulled by it. There was a waiver available for some women, but it was a very small number. So you do sometimes see arguments in some of our documents where women do want to get married and have a career, but it's relatively rare that those cases actually come through.
Just as World War I had advanced women's right to vote, the Second World War was pivotal in bringing more women, including those who were married, into the workplace. By 1938, 80,000 women were employed by state departments and recruited on the same basis as men. And in 1946, the Home Office made the progressive decision to lift the marriage bar, with all government departments following suit over the next 30 years. Of course, sexist attitudes still prevailed.
So naturally, their homes would come first to them, so they would feel it was their duty, if their children or indeed their husbands were ill, to go home and look after them.
Although many women did stop work to look after the family, some women were beginning to climb to the higher echelons of the civil service.
So Evelyn Sharp was a really prominent woman in the civil service. So she's actually the first woman to become a permanent secretary for the Ministry of Housing and Local Government. So that's in 1955, but what we have here is her application form to join the administrative grades in the civil service. And I think it shows that just the form in general, the context of how women were kind of battling an establishment that wasn't really necessarily ready for them or prepared for them maybe. And we can see that just in some of the simple things from the form here. Mark 6 on the application form states whether you're single or a widow. Obviously that question wasn't relevant to men. It's outlined here as being for female candidates.
A significant step was taken in 1961 when equal pay was introduced to the civil service, preceding the wider Equal Pay Act by 9 years. Indeed, by the 1970s, the civil service was recognised as providing one of the best careers to women at the time. Today, the civil service is more female than male, and the number of women in the senior civil service continues to rise. As more women enjoy successful careers, Melanie Dawes explains what more we need to do to ensure our workforce is as diverse as possible across all grades.
We've made great strides on gender equality in the civil service in the last 20 years. Through things like maternity leave, better flexible working, and by scrubbing down all our processes on recruitment, promotion and development, we've made a big difference. And we should be proud of where we've got to. With nearly 43% of the senior civil service made up of women, we do better than most other countries and far better than a lot of private sector companies. But there's still a lot more to do. I think the focus right now should be on really understanding the day-to-day experience of women in the civil service and getting on the table some of the stereotypes, behaviours and cultures that can still hold women back, things that have been the norm for too long and which we do need to address if we're going to keep moving forward. I'm really confident that we will carry on improving and that we're going to carry on making the civil service the kind of inclusive 21st century employer that we all want, creating even more opportunity for amazing women like these.
I'm Ruth Lawson. I'm head of the Basic Services Group at the Department for International Development, Pakistan.
I'm Andrea Prophet and I'm head of the Trade Statistics Unit.
I'm Kit. I work for the Department for Work and Pensions.
I'm Claire Moriarty. I'm the Permanent Secretary for the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs.
My name is Mems and I currently work in Parliament.
I'm Harriet Smith, Head of International Trade at the Department for Exiting the EU.
I'm Emma Howard-Boyd and I'm Chair of the Environment Agency.
I'm Alice Bunn and I'm International Director at the UK Space Agency.
I am Sangeeta Thapa. I am a driver at DFID Nepal.
I'm Bex Buckingham and I'm the Head of Office for the Department for International Development here in South Sudan.
I'm Kim Munro and I'm an Inspector with the Health and Safety Executive.
I'm Kate Davies and I'm a Liaison Officer for the National Crime Agency in Paris.
And I am proud of the women who have gone before me to make the civil service what it is today.
Okay, isn't it fab? I love the history. Isn't that good? I love it. Oh, thank you. So I now have a task for you because we're going to get a little bit more suffragette and suffragist-y. So you should have a little bag on your chair with some ribbons in it. So the thing I need to let you know about is the thing that really amazes me about the suffrage movement, and especially the suffragettes, was their brand. So you've seen the purple, white, green brand, yeah? It's the brand that you associate with the suffragettes. I was really amazed that, like, to get their story out and to get all of, what they did, they had their newspapers, they had flyers, but how do you do that without email? It just amazes me. How do you get a brand out without electronic communication? So I'm going to get you all to turn into suffragettes and suffragettes because I would like you to make yourself a brooch. So some of you have got green, white, and purple ribbons. You are going to become the Women's Social Political Union, headed up by Emmeline Pankhurst. Some of you are suffragists of the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies. Those are green, white, and red. I have done Women into Leadership in all of them this year. I have seen full-blown roses made out of these. They've set the bar very high. I've seen some people plait them. Some do, like in the cancer awareness loop. So design yourself a brooch with those ribbons and that safety pin. Then take a picture of it and tweet me it, because I would love to see some of them. So there you go. There's your task. And my top tip, if anybody doesn't like presenting, give people a craft to do, because nobody's looking at me right now. So that's my top tip. That's a bit of an aside. So while you're doing your ribbons, I'll just explain a little bit more about what we're doing this year. So I've got a bit of a secret to let you know about as well. Does anyone remember Back to the Future? Remember the film? Do you remember the DeLorean? Yeah, and it had the professor, it had Michael J. Fox, and it had Einstein the dog in it. So what I've decided is that in my lifetime, I want to time travel. I really, really do. Does anyone else want to time travel? Yeah? Yeah? Oh, good, thank you. You're going to come with me. So what I've decided, though, the DeLorean's just way too small, so I've decided I'm going to have a time travel bus. Because there are some amazing people in history that I really want on this time travel bus. And I want to bring them up to present day. So I've got some people I want on there. First one, I want a representative of all the suffrage societies, because there were hundreds of them. People hear about the suffragettes, but there are so many suffrage societies. I'd really love a rep from each one of those suffrage societies. I'd like somebody who boycotted the census as well. Have you heard of the 1911 census, where some people wrote all over it saying, no vote, no census? I would really love some of those on my bus, and I would love to have a conversation with them. Have you ever heard of the human letters? Has anyone ever heard of human letters? This is my favourite suffrage story. So the General Post Office said that they would post anything. And so what two suffragettes did was they posted themselves to 10 Downing Street, which I just think is genius. And in my head, I had them like stood at the post box with their hands in it, but it wasn't like that. It was like a courier, but I just imagined them in the post box. So they posted themselves to the Prime Minister, which I just think is hilarious. I just think it's genius. The Prime Minister did decline the package of the two suffragettes. They weren't allowed in, but I thought that was fab. So they would definitely be on my bus, because I thought that was quite clever. The others, it was somebody called Miss Maloney, who rang a bell every time Churchill spoke for an entire week. And the reason being, she said, well, women's voices aren't being heard, and neither are yours. So she just kept going. So she would be on my bus as well. I think she'd be a really interesting person to speak to. Somebody else, have you heard of the Cat and Mouse Act? You've heard of that? Yep. So women who were in prison, they were force-fed. The government couldn't have somebody die of hunger striking, so they would get released. But then there was an act that they could actually be released and then re-imprisoned afterwards. So I would really like some of those mice, all of those people who were actually hiding, to be on my bus as well, because I'd really like to talk to them. I like to talk to people who are force-fed as well. I can't imagine that brutality at all, especially because they weren't actually just force-fed through their mouths and nose. And I'd really like to speak to them, because I just cannot get my head around that at all. I'd also like to speak to working class women as well. I'm from a council estate. I'd love to speak to some working class, some LGBT, some women with disabilities who took part in the suffrage movement too. I would also like the Anti-Suffrage League as well. So they actively opposed votes for women. There was 15,000 of them. They weren't a small group, and I don't get it. I do not get anti-suffrage at all, so they would be on my bus. I don't think they'd be very popular on my time travel bus, but I think they'd be quite interesting. So they would be on my bus. The suffrage pilgrims, have you heard of the suffrage pilgrims? Because obviously it wasn't just about London. There's a really good book by Jane Robinson about the suffrage pilgrimage, where people, these were mainly suffragists, went from all the four corners of the UK down to London, but they actually got the message out to the smaller villages. The slight downside is the anti-suffragists got there first, riled them up, said that they were the suffragettes. They had all manner of things thrown at them and actually experienced quite a lot of abuse through that time. So they would be on my bus. I'd like to invite them. Then, male supporters as well. Men were force-fed. Male MPs Keir Hardie, George Lansbury and Frederick Pethick Lawrence, I would like them definitely on my bus. Men were force-fed, especially Frederick Pethick Lawrence, the editor of the newspaper. I'd love to speak to him. Then, let's go to the civil service as well. Have a look at the bold bits in here, because as on the video, it was clerical work. Women could do work in the civil service if it was of a less important character. How do you feel about that? And this is the best one, satisfied with a lower rate of pay. Happy with that one? I wonder what they felt about that. And my favourite is placed in separate rooms under proper female supervision. And so I want to get them on my bus and bring them to hot desking. Because can you imagine their mind, like when they see hot desking, like there's men and women in the same room? But I would love some of them to be on the bus. I really, really would, to see what it was like then. Then, if we go back to 1918, 100 years ago, women were actually the majority of the civil service because we were still at war. There was a huge drop afterwards. And why was it that not all women could vote at that time? Well, the women were actually the majority of the population. And you never know, we might all vote for the same party. That's what we do. So that's why it wasn't opened up to all women, and that's why there were all those clauses put in place. So let's go to the 1925 exams. So as explained on the film, there were barriers to women in the civil service, and this wasn't that long ago. So there were the entrance exams. So I've got some stats for you. They weren't even opened up until 1925. A bit after that, 88 women competed, only 8 were successful during that time. So there were these barriers in place, and you heard on the video, there was the marriage bar as well. I don't know whether you can read, it might be a little bit small, but I love the quote. To us, married women have been, to quote the Treasury, a perfect nuisance. Don't you just love that? I love the idea of being a nuisance, but I really love the idea of being a perfect nuisance. You know, I think that's great. So I'm just going to adopt that on my business card. A perfect nuisance. So the marriage bar was in place, which is why I'd actually like to go back in time on my time travel bus and actually get some of those women that had to resign, and they really didn't want to, but they had to, only because they got married. So they would be on my bus. Then, let's go back to 1955. As I explained on the video, I would really love Dame Evelyn Sharp on my bus. The reason why, I would love to meet her on her very first day. Can you imagine being the first female permanent secretary, and your very first day in that meeting? I would love to speak to her. So she'd be on my bus. Then, as I said at the start, the theme this year is past, present, and future, because I could talk about suffrage history forever. I really, really could, just because I like wearing a sash. And I could just keep going. By the way, how's your brooches going? Good? Good, you're looking at me now, so therefore I'm guessing you finished. But I think there's something about thinking about present day as well. How are we doing now? And the future, importantly. These are the stats of women in the civil service. Have a look at the bottom one. It really varies between department. We've still got a long way to go. Lots done, more to do, especially in the civil service, senior civil service. As Melanie said, 43% of the senior civil service are women. We got more to do, especially to make it more consistent across departments. As Melanie said, her focus is process, talent, and culture. And there's something that I need to let you know. So anyone who just came to my breakout session, you know that I love a network. And Fiona said as well that I love I set up 2 networks, but I really believe in people power. So going from here, I want you to have a think about the past, think about where we are now, but actually what you can do as well. So I've got some takeaways because I'm greatly running out of time because I love suffrage that much. So takeaway action for you. I should put at the top, tweet me a picture of your brooch. Have you done that? No? Good. Do that. But I'd really love you to talk about inclusion much more. So Claire mentioned it at the start as well about the difference between diversity and inclusion. I would like you to speak up if you see behaviours that exclude, no-brainer. Make sure everyone's included, no-brainer. Join a network. If there isn't a network, set one up. I did. I never even asked permission. Nobody said no, so I just kept going. Number 5, I think it's a no-brainer for zero tolerance to bullying and harassment. Become a mentor. It's not just about senior people who can be mentors. Become a mentor. But things don't fall in your lap. Get up there and just roll the sleeves up and get on with it. Ask difficult questions. Become a perfect nuisance and get it on your business card. And I would say as well, run a role models program as well. If you've not got one set up, set one up. But I would say, let's look at the past, where we are now, to the future, but it's actually our responsibility, not anybody else's. Thank you.